Tim O'Brien, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's been a really long time since we've talked. We know each other from the old linked LA days, the
Yeah.
late lamented. And the reason I wanted to have you on the show was you're someone that always knows how to keep things positive. And I've seen you talk so many times, and you teach people how to take their best assets and put that forward. And I think that's really important in this time. So thank you for being here.
I'm glad to be here.
One thing I always like to talk about in the beginning is the backgrounds. So I picked this background because when I think of you, I think about, Main Street and everyday businesses and what it is that you do to help them advertise. Okay, come in, welcome, we're open for business. So that's what you are to me. So hope
Love
that
it.
works for you. Yeah.
Well, it definitely does, and I'll tell you why. Because I mean, as you know, when you talk about helping people differentiate themselves, the focus is on your personal brand. And years ago, before social media, before we were primarily a service-driven economy, personal branding was thought to be for people who were famous movie stars or professional athletes or politicians. But the fact that 79.4% of our GDP is service sector driven, which means people are selling things that are invisible. More and more people are becoming the product. So it's kind of the way our economy has evolved is kind of democratized the concept of personal branding, and it applies to, as much as it applies to LeBron James or Beyonce, it applies to you and me in our day-to-day activities.
So how did you wind up doing this, and how did you get good at it?
It was kind of a circuitous path. My background was I was a lawyer, and I didn't, I from the very beginning I knew I didn't want to practice law, and then I actually pursued a dream that I had of being an actor, and I remember being one of the first acting classes, and there was a guy, Marcello Rolando, who was he was teaching the Power Hour, and it was all about personal empowerment, and it was like mana for me, and then, I continued on the path of being an actor and eventually came out to California and, tried my best to succeed, didn't get picked. And then it became time to, I thought I needed to make a transition, and was I going to go back to being a lawyer? But by this time I had fully immersed myself in personal development, and I was like, no, I want to be in this space. And then I got into the space, and you sort of, you get into it, you try this, you try that, and eventually you sort of find your niche. And what I did was I asked myself, what was I really good at? And I was really good, I thought, at building rapport. And I was going to teach people how to build rapport and build relationships. And eventually it evolved into, the concept of personal branding. And what I really like about it, Martin, is I got my start in public speaking or personal development in the California prison system. I wasn't a prisoner, but
Really?
I did motivational speeches and for prisoners, and at the core of it was personal branding. And I've gone on to speak to CEOs from YPO. I've traveled around Europe speaking on personal branding, and one of the great things about it is I never have to change my message, right? Because everybody has a brand. It's either positive, negative, or neutral. So if I were to do something on leadership and say, hey, here's a leadership technique you should do, it doesn't apply to everybody equally. You've got to be more mindful of your audience. For me, this is it. I mean, if you want to ignore your brand, go ahead. If you want to build your brand, go ahead. And it's a universal concept that applies to everybody, no matter where you find yourself.
Well, I think the thing that people struggle with is that, for some people anyway, the way they talk about branding winds up being pretentious. And I don't think that's the way you mean it. I mean, whether you call it your personal brand or what people know you for, if you think back, 100 years ago when a man's word was his bond, and you didn't shake someone's hand and promise something without delivering on it. That was your brand back then, though. They wouldn't have thought to call it that. But essentially what you're talking about is your reputation as much as your brand, right?
And you're right. That's just a great line. I mean, that's really it. They didn't call it back then personal branding. It's sort of that nomenclature is much more modern, but it existed back then. I mean, when you were even practicing law, the witnesses, you believe the best brands.
Yeah.
Somebody gets on the stand and, he's kind of slippery. Really basically saying is, I don't trust his brand. And so, but it becomes much more relevant in the business place today because, the product took precedence. But today, when you're selling, it means they need to see something to really be comfortable with their choice. So if they can't see what they're buying because it's financial services, or if it's legal services or negotiations, if you can't see that, you've got to see something else to make you comfortable making that choice. And that thing is your brand. So it becomes so relevant today for, like you said, I love it. I appreciate when you say you think of Main Street, because the truth of the matter is personal branding has dropped down from the high profile to the rest of us, the rank and file in our day-to-day lives.
Well, when you think about it, the change with, I remember when I first started looking at Yelp, and people thought that my superpower was picking great restaurants, and they just couldn't understand, like, all the best places. But when,
awesome.
Right? But when Yelp first came out, I was like, okay, if anytime I'm taking somebody out to lunch, I want something 4 stars or better. And I found out that I just had really good experiences with that. Now, I've got friends in the restaurant business, and they tend tenaciously to their Yelp reputations because it's real money there, right? But even if Yelp isn't in the space you're in, so like I'm in the healthcare market, and I help practices improve their data technology and their communication. It's amazing how much healthcare people talk to one another. And if you have a bad brand, we'll call it, old-fashioned bad reputation, it follows you around everywhere. And, back when I was in the entertainment business, that was true just as much as anything else. People from this record company, quote unquote, really knew their marketing, but you don't want to get anyone that does radio promotion from that. No, those guys don't know what they're doing, which may not be true, but that was their reputation, right? And so, so what is it?
I mean, remember, like Marlon Brando, for a long time, his personal brand, he was difficult to work with. So, the jobs kind of dried up. And what a lot of people don't know is he had to audition for the role in The Godfather, because he had built a personal brand up that the guy's so difficult, his talent did not exceed how difficult he was. It was the opposite. So I don't want to do business with him. He's too difficult.
Yeah.
And here's a guy who was, regarded at the time as of the greatest American actor, having to audition for roles.
Yeah. So one thing that brings up for me, and when you look at your clients, how do you get them to take a look at what their current brand or reputation actually is versus what they pretend it is? Do you know what I mean by that?
I do. And it all does start with a good self-reflection. There was a study, Martin, done in Men's Health magazine years ago, and they wanted to know how many men thought they were good looking. So they surveyed all their members, all their subscribers, and they gave them 3 choices: very good looking, not good looking. And here's what all the results were. It's not a joke. It's the truth. They found that 80% of all men think they're really good looking. Now, 80% of men are probably not really good looking, right? 80% of men are probably not good looking. It's probably a smattering between all 3.
Right.
And I share that with you because it does start with a willingness to have a true self-perspective, because you've got to come at it from a position of authenticity. We would all love to be Brad Pitt or Beyonce or LeBron James, these superstars. But I tell people, sometimes you just gotta, you gotta embrace your Urkel.
Yeah.
And Urkel had an amazing career, right? Tom Hanks. Sure, I'd love to be this, sexy movie star, but his brand is he's a nice guy. And nice guy has turned him into maybe the most popular movie star in the world at one point in time.
Yeah.
So there's got to be a willingness. You can't force people. You've got to be a willingness. There's got to be a willingness to say, hey, I really want to get a sense of what are my real attributes that I should be building my brand on. And if you can't get people to get to that space, you're wasting your time.
Yeah. So So you might do well but whether you're a man or woman, or you may do really well with the opposite sex, regardless of what your attributes are. But if you're, if you're Brad Pitt, the line that works on the ladies for you might not be the same that if you look like me. Not that I'm not devastatingly good looking, but
well, I'm glad that you clarified, because you are.
Yeah. But if you look at it realistically, that's true for everything else. So if you're LeBron James and you're starting a podcast, you probably could skip some steps that Martin Devon really can't skip. And,
Yep.
So even if it's a train wreck, people are going to look at, okay, LeBron James is interviewing people. Let's take a look at that. Whereas, there's some things I need to do in order to build credibility and to build an audience that he wouldn't have to do. So the thing I always wonder when business people look at their brand, what is a common thing that they overlook that they need to take account for? Like, it's easy to say you're good looking, you're not good looking, but if you're a business person that's in the, I don't know, let's say, give me an example of who you would help and how you would start that conversation out with them.
Well, a lot of times, what happens is people wrap their brand up in what they do for a living and their title and how much money they make. So you get people that make a lot of money, and there's a lot of people, just like in sports and just like in entertainment, that make their living off of this person being successful. So they indulge a lot of behavior, right? Whereas they wouldn't indulge you and me.
Right.
Sometimes it's remarkable when I see people behave certain ways in the public eye, and there are people that actually defend them. And really, by any objective standard, the behavior is indefensible. But nobody's perfect. I mean, you make mistakes. You're contrite. You ask for forgiveness, and 99.9% of the time, people forgive you. But you get people who are reluctant to acknowledge that maybe they're a lot lower down on that personal brand credibility scale than they thought they were, because what they did was they wrapped their brand up in, hey, I make a lot of money. Hey, I'm the CEO. Hey, I'm the leader in my industry. Hey, I have some degree of fame. You see it a lot in today, and I know people, you when you venture into politics, it can be divisive, but for me and you, Martin, I'm just using it illustratively. So look at a guy like Michael Bloomberg, right? Here's a guy who was a successful mayor of New York, spent $400 million and got three votes, 3 delegates from the island of Samoa. At the end of the day, just because you make a lot of money, it doesn't mean that you have a great personal brand. And what's really important is that you detach from any of the things that might get in the way from you making that true assessment. And one of the first things you have to do is make sure you surround yourself with people who tell you the truth. Critical. And that's hard, because if I'm really successful in terms of money and fame, and why would I want to surround myself with people who tell me, hey, you're misbehaving, right? But it's really important that you have those people around you.
Yeah.
So it starts for me with that, being willing to hear the truth.
So when you start working with the clients, I guess you can tell pretty soon whether they can hear the truth or not. Do you just say, "Oh, we're not a good fit," if you can see they don't want to hear the truth?
Yeah, and it's not an easy conversation for a couple of reasons. One is, we're in the business of helping people and making money helping people. So you want to try to help clients as much as you possibly can. And the other thing is, it's not, when you're going to have a conversation with somebody like that, people aren't always receptive to it. Here's what usually happens. It usually runs its natural course, because early on, people get excited because I'm bringing new energetic concepts to them. But the rubber really hits the road when they have to start to implement. So when you start having meetings where you start being repetitive in what you're reinforcing, it becomes clear that these people are not going to implement. And so what happens is it kind of runs its course. So the way I work with people is I work on a quarterly basis, because I want to out and I want them to have an out. So at the end of the first quarter, if you're not doing the work, hey, we've done what I think we can do. Again, I'm not in the business of gratuitously telling people, you're not available, you're not open, there's something wrong with you. I'm not interested in that. It's a way for us to gracefully exit from the relationship. Whereas before, I'd say, okay, we'll work together for a year. And then by the 9th month, it was just like sticking bamboo shoots under your fingernails for both,
right? For both.
For them as well. So, it's all about exiting from the relationship gracefully for them too. Let's say, for example, it's been a good quarter. Let me implement what I'm doing, and maybe we'll circle back at a later date.
Sure. It also allows you to get really specific around your goals when you do it quarterly. So you're really clear. Did you get what you wanted out of the first quarter? And here's what's up next. Is it worth it to you to put in the work and the money to do that? And that makes sense.
And I'll tell you, there's two things that you just used a word that's really, you can't overstate it enough. Put in the work.
Yeah.
See, I get you excited because I pick your brand with you. Like, I take you through this process that I've created, pick your brand, and you're energized by it. But that's the easy part. Now what you have to do is you got to start to behave in a certain way, and it's got to be authentic. You got to start to change, and that's hard for people. And everything you do either adds to or takes away from your personal brand credibility. So you start to think intentionally about how you're acting on a day-to-day basis. A lot of people just don't want to do that. So when you said that word, are you willing to do the work? Because building a great brand is work. It is work.
Well, the thing that people don't realize is there's the brand you pick and there's a brand people pick for you. And those aren't the same thing, right?
Well, your job, from my perspective, is to decide what your brand is and then work energetically to create that word or phrase in the mind of another, right? Now, if you're LeBron James or you're Oprah, you have a team of people. You have millions of dollars that are reinforcing that brand through commercials, through social media, right? They're helping you do that. Your job, my job, is to do that by ourselves. And so what I would say is where maybe a LeBron James can actually choose the word they want people to think of, because they have so much money, so many resources, they can inundate you with it to the point where it almost becomes like Pavlovian, right? For us, what we're after, Martin, is that people say positive things about you and me. That's what we're after. And every now and then they ring the bell. They say exactly the word or phrase we want them to say. But if we can get people to say mostly positive things about us, we're in good shape. We've done a good job.
But you're really underlying, in the people you're picking as an example, you're really underlying the point. Because yes, Oprah and LeBron have a lot of money and they have a lot of help, but they also put in the work. So in terms of, you can, I'm not a huge basketball fan, but, I definitely know that LeBron's a really good player. But beyond being a really good player, he drags his teams to success, whether they want to or not, whether it's pretty or not pretty. And the same thing for Oprah. She walks the walk. I may not be in her target demographic, but I definitely recognize that many of the women in my life, they're enthusiastic about whatever Oprah has to say, and whatever, if she recommends a book, a lot of them will read it. Whereas your point around Michael Bloomberg, people want to buy his tools for stock, or they may use some of the, in that area. He's got that brand, but
absolutely,
his brand didn't extend, like the stuff he was really good at. He was really good at. And I wasn't living in New York at the time that he was the mayor, but I know a lot of New Yorkers that were really pleased with, his brand was along with what they wanted. But when it comes to being the Democratic nominee, his brand didn't hit what the new customers, which would be the Democratic primary voters, wanted in a candidate. However you want to phrase it, without, bottom line, his brand didn't carry the day in the way that you're talking about.
I want to just say, to kind of simplify it, because it's right on the money. There's two things I think you said which are really spot on. One is the target demographic, And then two is your brand has nothing to do with what you think of you. We think we're awesome, period, end of story. The real barometer is, what do you feel about me? The people that are watching it, what do they feel about us? That's what matters when it comes to personal branding. We think we're doing a fantastic job here, imparting great wisdom. At the end of the day, the measurement is solely in the hands of your target audience. Similarly, when you said about Oprah, she's right. I mean, you're right about that. You need to know who your target audience is. You know, my mom used to have an expression, take it from where it comes, right? So you might receive criticism. A good example is Colin Kaepernick. Nike makes these sneakers, and and people are like, how could you buy those sneakers? And the answer is, they're not trying to appeal to those people. They know the demographic they're trying to appeal to. They believe they can monetize it and make money off of it. And that's what branding is all about, is it's about matching the brand to the target audience. So, you and I walk in the room and there's a bunch of women, watching Oprah give away cars, and we're like, this is ridiculous. And she would be like, who cares what you think? I'm not trying to appeal to you. Right. I'm appealing to those 32 women that are screaming and yelling because they're giving a car away.
Right.
So it's so super important that you know who your target audience is, and that if you're running afoul of your target audience, if you're not behaving in a way that's consistent with what your target audience wants. But if it's people outside your target audience,
you gotta have a thick skin.
I'm not saying you ignore them. Yeah. You got to take it from where it comes.
So, I don't want to let go of this one point about being clear and honest about how people see you. So like you, I've done a lot of personal development, and one of the most amazing tools I found was one of the courses I did was called the Self-Expression Leadership Program. They had you do an interview with people around you and you asked them a series of questions about, your leadership ability, about how much you care, how authentic, how reliable you are, really difficult questions that you have to be willing to hear the answers to. And what was so amazing is, like, when I did mine, I realized that, like, one of the questions was something like, are you a man of your word? And the way I related to myself is, I'm totally not a man of my word. I'm full of it. I let people down here and here and here, and there are the other places. So, like, my self-assessment was very low. And then everyone I interviewed was like, oh yeah, bulletproof, man of his word. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Do you not know me? And that's neither here nor there. I still believe that I'm more accurate than they are, but that doesn't really matter. The point is, if you're looking at your personal brand, you want to know what actually, what is your brand actually? And you want to come to grips with what do people really think of you, as opposed to what you pretend they think of you. And the craziest thing I discovered was, you can ask them and they will tell you if you're willing to listen. So where does that go in your process, and how do you get people to confront that?
So I tell you, an exercise I do in one of my classes, and let me tell you, it's a hair raiser. So I ran a program for years called Rainmaker U, and I would get 15, 20 professionals in a room. We would meet once a quarter for a full day, work on personal branding. People didn't know each other in the class. So what I would do is I would get index cards. And so I would write on, let's say there were 20 people in a class. I would write Tim O'Brien on 20 index cards. And I'd fold them in half. Okay. Little 3x5, fold them in half, make it like a little tent. And there'd be 20 of them. So everybody came into the room and had 20 cards with their name on it. Okay. We then passed them out. And what happened was, everybody got a card with everybody else's name on it. And I said, okay, now you don't know the people in the room. Have a look. What's the word or phrase that comes to mind when you think of that person? And they write it down. And if it was negative, they had to say why. And I would collect the cards back, and I'd have Martin, 20 cards with Martin. And we would take a break, and people go pick up their cards and read them. And these were people who were pretty successful. And people would be like, right? I mean, it was, bullet piercing, right? And some people are like, and it was funny because, Martin, there were some people who left their cards there. And at first I would wonder why, because I'd have class after class after class, not the same day, but over the course of the years. And some people didn't pick up their cards till the end of the day. And I realized, people's psychology was, I don't want to know right now. I'll do it at the end of the day, right? And they would avoid looking at those cards because it was painful. Nobody knew you. They had nothing to gain by being insulting or by complimenting you. And you got 20 people giving you honest, direct feedback about what they thought your brand was. It probably was worth and the course was $6,500. It was probably worth the cost of the course, that one exercise alone. Because imagine if you thought your brand was A and it was Z.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember there was
that was the $1 billion that Bloomberg spent. And
right?
He thought his brand was A, and he turned out his brand was Samoa. And having nothing to do with politics, right? It's just
no.
Yep.
And it's so funny. I'm watching, and his tagline was, "Michael, get it done." And I thought, what a terrible tagline, because that's not really an issue right now. You know what I mean? Like, I just
for his audience, not forget whether it is or it isn't, but it's for his.
It just didn't resonate. I just thought, even listening, I just thought to myself, that's a terrible tagline, right? But you spent $400 million, and here's the point, right? I don't know the answer to this, but either there were a lot of consultants, or at the end of the day, Mike made the choice, and they probably, it's great, go with it. And I wonder if anybody sat in that room and said, that sounds really dumb, but you're afraid to speak up because there's a lot of power in that room. There's a lot of money in that room. And that's the danger. That's the danger when it comes to personal branding. So what I loved about the exercise was, I don't care what your job is. Nobody knows what you do. Nobody knows how much money you make. Nobody knows what your title is. They're just giving it to you straight. And it was really powerful. And by the way, it wasn't always negative. A lot of people got really positive feedback. It reinforced what they thought their brand was, and it really fortified their spirit. So it wasn't about trying to get negative feedback or wake people up. It was just about truth.
Now, did you do this after they got you got enough of an impression of a person, so it wasn't just their physical appearance, or does the physical appearance get into it as well?
They came in the morning and they interacted with each other, and after a couple of hours, but it wasn't, they didn't know each other. See, because people make up their mind about you in 1/4 of 1 second. Right? So what's really important is that you recognize that if you're breathing your branding, and yes, it's not fair that here's a statistic. They think people who, overwhelmingly people think people who are taller are smarter than people who are shorter.
Yep.
So one of the things for Bloomberg was he wanted to be able to stand on a box. But again, the lack of awareness to even suggest that, knowing it would get out in the public, it minimized him. But knowing that when I look smaller than everybody else, it just naturally will cut against me. And so the message I wanted to get out was, guys, what message are you sending in a fraction of a second when people meet you? Which means, how are you dressed? How are you groomed? What's your physical fitness? What's your posture? What's your energy? What's your handshake? What's your smile? All those things have enormous impact on your personal brand in a fraction of a second.
And what was the expression? The truth shall set you free.
Yeah.
Whatever you're starting with, that's what you're dealing with. And and interestingly enough, some of the things that could be considered positive for other people are negative. I have a number of friends that are really good looking, and in certain areas they have a hard time taken seriously. And
yes.
So every positive has a negative as well. So they have to do things, or they overcome their advantages in a sense. You just have to be clear about it. So let me ask you, one of the things that I remember about you is that you could be in a room with 20 people and you remember everyone's name. Is that true?
Well, I wouldn't say, you could say that. I mean, I do my best to remember people's names, right?
Yep. So what is it you do to make sure that you remember people's names?
So the very first thing, it's funny you ask that question because remembering people's names is a reflection of how emotionally connected or interested you are in people. So I want you to think about this. Have you ever forgotten the name of a really good-looking woman? Of course not. Have you ever forgotten the name of a really important prospect? Of course not. Have you ever forgotten the name of your waitress, of your car parker? Of course you have. Why? Because I'm not emotionally connected. I don't really care. And what I say to people is not everybody deserves the same amount of time, but whatever time you give people, they deserve the same amount of attention, which is 100%. Now I have an advantage because I'm in the business of connecting with people. So if you're a private equity guy, or if you're a lawyer, you don't have that same obligation that, I shouldn't say obligation. You're not wired that same way. So that was a big advantage. And then I intentionally, there's neurolinguistic programming, NLP. There are mental techniques. Associate the name with an image and all that sort of stuff. And if you practice it, you can develop it.
Yep.
So,
but it is important, huh?
Oh, I think it's vitally important. Dale Carnegie said it best: the sweetest sound to any person, any language, is the sound of their name.
Yeah, it's definitely true. So let's shift a little bit from the general topics to specific. So the COVID-19 situation is impacting all of our lives, and it's a major theme of this show. What do you think the opportunities are for people that are stuck at home, and particularly around, I'd say, scientifically speaking, 63.4% of businesses have to change the way they do things. I made that number up, obviously, for anyone that's wondering. So what is it you've observed, and what is it you think people have to do in these times to get better and to adapt?
Well, I think the number one thing, and you and I connected because I sent out a link to a podcast, The 7 Habits of a Highly Effective Citizen. And I think the number one thing that I am finding and very discouraging is people are not tolerant of each other, right? People process crisis in different ways. People react in different ways. And and you have to be tolerant, right? You can't be like, oh, you're tone deaf that, you want to get back to business. You're just a business owner and you own a restaurant. Well, you got to appreciate that person has to feed a family and keep people employed. Similarly, you can't be like, oh, you get a paycheck, so you don't care about going back to work. No, you don't realize that person has their mother lives with them and she's elderly, or, they have little kids and they're frightened because they don't know about what the impacts of COVID it's going to be on them. So to me, that was the first thing. Like that was what hit me. And so I think it's really important. And I'm reluctant to use this word because I'm not a big believer in no judgment, because I don't think you live in a society where you can have no judgment, right? But you have to sort of, as hard as you can, not judge other people the way people are reacting. That's the most important thing to me, Martin. The second thing is, got to be positive. You got to stay positive. And it's funny. I mean, I've gotten some brushback. These are my words for being too positive. It's really important is you got to stay in shape. And I don't mean just physical shape. I mean business shape. I mean mental shape. And so here's a good example. When somebody becomes the heavyweight champ of the world, their trajectory usually follows the same path. They work really, really hard, let themselves get out of shape, and then they have to get back in shape. Evander Holyfield was different. He had made the commitment that he was going to stay in shape in between fights. So he might take a week or 2 weeks off to recuperate, but he'd get right back in the gym. So I think it's important for me is that I'm finding things to do to prepare once the gates open again. And that I'm not digging myself out of a hole, but I'm preparing. Is it cleaning up my database? I'm working on a new product right now called the Self-Confidence Tool Chest. been wanting to do it for a long time in an ebook format, right? 5 tools to help you with your self-confidence, overcome phobias, and address some fears. And been wanting to do it for a long time. So I'm going to use this time. I'm working on the ebook right now, and hopefully I'll have it ready to go and I can launch it over the next week or two. So I do think it's important is that, try to find those things that you can stay in shape, and maybe all you can do is stay neutral. Maybe you can't even move forward in your business, but at a minimum, you maintain that status quo. And so when the gates are open, bang, you lean right into it. So I think those are 3 of the key things that I'm focused on anyway.
All right, that's awesome. What do you think in terms of community? Do you see anything changing? I mean, obviously, the country is divided in a lot of different ways, but is there some commonalities you could see where this is going to help us remember that we actually all care about each other? We kind of forgot that.
Martin, I'm from New Jersey, and it would be easy for me to say, I think so, and I think we love each other, and I think we have to show that. I don't necessarily think so. I think it's unfortunate. I think it'll be for a period of time. I wish it were different, but I saw 9/11, and after 9/11, I remember being in New Jersey, and literally on the day, and the days after, people were coming out of New York City. They were on the side of the road walking home because there was no transportation, and people were saying, "Hey, you need a ride home?" And the guy would be like, "Yeah, but I don't live 5 miles. Don't worry, get in." It was extraordinary how people were helping. I mean, extraordinary. People had flags on their cars, right? The churches were filled. I remember watching people let people go in front of them, and that was 9/11, an event that, was our modern day Pearl Harbor, obviously. And I couldn't imagine us being any more united than that. But I think over time, I'm hopeful, but I think over time, I think people will retreat to their corners. But right now, I think people are rowing, in the same direction with each other. And it's a great thing to see. And it's a great thing for America. And it's a great thing for our country. And I do think that unity will be sustained for a period of time, which will be vitally important for reinvigorating the economy. So, I mean, I thank you for asking me that question, because I always pride myself on being truthful. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But I just didn't want to give what I thought was a cliche response.
No, I do want what you honestly think, but one of the things I wonder about, I don't think people are going to stop being people. So definitely, people aren't going to change their perspectives on politics. They aren't going to change a lot of the core beliefs they've had. But definitely, I think they're going to look at risks differently than they did. So people are going to wash their hands. Kids who were raised today are going to wash their hands. They're going to have better hygiene. Like if you go to the park and you go to the restroom in the park, most people are ladies may not like to hear this, but if you go to the men's room before this, the percentage of men that wash their hands after doing their business was not as high as you would have hoped that it would have been. And I will bet you that the percentage of people washing their hands after using the washroom is going to go way up, and it'll stay that way for at least a generation. So I do think there's going to be some habits that we change. And what I'm hoping, although I maybe I'm being Pollyannish, I'm hoping that to a certain extent we realize how much we need each other, and to have maybe a little better understanding from a self-interested perspective that where we live in a community matters, and how our neighbors are doing matters, in an extent that it didn't, because we had the ability to be selfish, that we've lost. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that, I said this all along, I think most of us, man, woman, black, white, tall, short, ethnicities, all care and love each other for the most part. I think, unfortunately, there are pockets that divide the people. But sometimes I think to myself, Martin, right? Like, I don't know these people that these politicians or the media are talking about. I don't know these people, because the people that I associate with, and and I associate with all different socioeconomic backgrounds. All people really want to do is raise their children. They want to keep their family safe. They want to live in a decent place, and they want to be able to send their kids to school and educate their children. And I think for the most part, it's almost like I feel, Martin, like there's 535 politicians and some media talking heads on the one side, and there's 330 million Americans on the other side. Because I've never seen anybody in need be refused help by another fellow citizen because of, their ethnicity or their, you know what I mean? Like people coming over and borrowing milk from each other. Or I see the way when people, lost a life and people rally around and raise money for the family for burial costs. I think that has always been there. I do. I think it's always been there, and I think it will always be there, because I think it's almost like that's how humanity is wired. And so what I'm hopeful for is the people that have the megaphone can stop putting us in corners. Because I don't see it. I see the rest of us just wanting to raise our kids, feed our families, put a roof over our house, go to work, have a job, earn a good living, and get along with each other. That's how how I view it, right? I think you guys stay over there. Let the rest of us just live our lives.
Beautiful. So if someone's interested in connecting with you, Tim, and working on their personal brand, how do they do that?
Well, you can email me certainly at tob@thepersonalbrandinggroup.com, tob@thepersonalbrandinggroup.com. Or Martin, you can simply go to my website, which is thepersontoSee.com. So everything I do is try to help people become the person to see with their target audience, whether you're a financial advisor, a lawyer, or whoever you may be. Who's your target audience? You want to be the person to see. So our website is thepersontoSee.com.
Beautiful.
And so if you want to connect, I'd love to connect with you. I'd love to stay connected with you on social media. And that's it.
All right. So, one last question for you, Tim. With the theory that the way that we succeed in life is winning each day individually, and if you can win the day, you're well on your way to the kind of life you want. What would you leave our audience with? How can they win the day from your perspective?
I would say is simple, good, complex, bad. And what I mean by that is focus on simple things that you can execute in a cumulative way so that you gain momentum, because then the momentum begins to build on itself and begins to carry you through. And that momentum, even in challenging times, is what sustains you. So the solutions are very, very simple. Focus on the simple and do everything you can just to execute those simple things that are right in front of you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim. Thanks for being here today, and look forward to our next conversation.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Martin.
All right.